Hello, I'm Dr. F.E. Chow, and I've been involved with complementary alternative medicine for a very long time. Originally, through my family's exposure to traditional Chinese medicine and Qigong, Tai Chi, nutrition, and a way of life. When I escaped China as a refugee from the Second World War with the oncoming invasion of the Japanese into China, I was fortunate enough to be able to have the permission from the Chinese government and the Canadian government to leave China because my father had done some work with the government and he was able to get a special permission. Because out of the large family, I was the only one that was born in China. And so at that time, I came over on the Empress of Russia boat and arrived in Victoria and resided in Duncan, British Columbia. That's where my family was. So, though the family did not practice per se acupuncture and herbs, but they lived every day with the concepts of Chinese health practices. That means being careful of how we live, be careful of our compassion and love in relating to people, to family and friends and everybody. My dad did do moxibustion and herbs. So did my mother. Herbs and nutrition. And I witnessed that friends did qigong and did acupuncture and other aspects of traditional Chinese medicine. Now, not knowing really the social aspect of society at that time, we felt very that people were dubious about what we were practicing. And a few cases stand out very, very prevalently with me, is that where Western medicine had given up on some people not able to diagnose what it is and that they were prognosed to die within a short time or imminent death. So my father and his friends, our friends, asked permission to use our medicine, Chinese medicine, with the, quote, hopeless cases. One special case particularly is Mr. Wong, who they didn't know what was the matter, but he was imminently going to die. So my father and the friends all carried out moxibustion, qigong, tai chi, herbal remedies, and adjusted the food that he is to eat and massage and everything. And Mr. Wong got better and survived for 15 years. I was moving into the nursing profession, and yet I'm faced with the prejudices at those days about Chinese medicine being not accepted, and with a lot of prejudice against it. When I came from China, moving back a little bit, when I came to China, I never met my sister that was just one step older than I was, because she had died from hair lip operation. The operation was not successful, and she died from the operation. So that was sort of my first encounter with the iniquities of Western medicine. Although we had a good doctor and we certainly abide by Western medicine, these incidences preyed on my mind. So when I went into nursing then, back around 1950s, I was loving the fact that I was learning nursing and being part of the medical system. However, I really got disenchanted and frustrated with the frequency in which patients returned to the hospital and getting worse and worse in their condition, never getting better. I'm talking about not all cases, but enough that I was discouraged. I call it the revolving door process. They left and they always came back with a worse condition. And they died prematurely. So then when my father himself died from a side reaction to medication that was given to him for a simple case like Bell's palsy, that was very, very upsetting. So that's a second death due to the use of Western medicine, perhaps inappropriately. And so after my father died, I seriously took up Chinese medicine and Qigong. I had absorbed it through family use and all, but now I seriously took up the teachings and learnings of traditional Chinese medicine. It was not accepted at that time, so this is talking about 1950s, mid-1950s, and we were looked upon as, quote, weird, But however, in my 10 years of exploring Chinese medicine in depth, I found that I could integrate Chinese medicine and Western medicine in my work as a nurse. And it was during my work in, my specialty in nursing is in psychiatry and in public health. So in my psychiatric work, I was able to get results where other people could not. For example, the patients were hostile and belligerent and refusing socialization, refusing to eat, refusing to take medication. And somehow I was able to, with the concepts of Chinese medicine and Qigong, able to placate them, and they were cooperative and socializing and eating and taking their medication and etc. So I experienced a combination of Western medicine and Chinese health practices and Qigong that we got results where we couldn't get results with them with just medicine. And in fact, one of the doctors pulled me in and said, "Are you giving them acupuncture?" I said, "No, not acupuncture, but Qigong, yes, and also relating to them in a manner that they feel good and that they feel accepted as an individual." So that involved, let's say, into the 60s, when there was a growing information request for other than Western medicine and surgery to help with treating of the patients. So that growth went on because I was fortunate to be appointed to the National Committee of the Department of Health and Human Services. First in the Educational Department, and then next is the National Institutes of Health, which is a research arm of the government. So into the 60s and 70s, there was a movement begun on health promotion and wellness. It was the beginning. And at the National Committee, as an advisor to the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Califano at that time, I was the chair of the Health Promotion and Wellness Committee that was first formed with the National Council. That was a breakthrough to incorporate other ideas of other than medicine and surgery into the system. It was a small step, but nevertheless, it was an opening. So from there then, we were promoting Chinese medicine, and in the 70s, there was a great interest, early 70s, there was a great interest in acupuncture because in China, one of the noted noted journalists from the Times from New York was in China and suffered a appendectomy and had tremendous pain. So they used acupuncture for treating the pain and got immediate relief. So Paul Dudley White, Dr. Paul Dudley White, was somehow involved with this, and he became a great proponent for Chinese medicine. And then Dr. Rosenfeld, Dr. Rosen, who was an EENT specialist, ear, nose, and throat, ear, nose, and throat specialist, he also did some operation with using acupuncture as an anesthetic instead of the usual Western anesthesia, chemical anesthesia, was highly successful. And he also used acupuncture to treat hearing, and that is one of the most difficult conditions to treat because it takes a long time. But he did have some success in that people who couldn't hear could hear without looking and reading the person's lips. So these were very significant individual situations that made impact on opening up the whole system of Western medical care into considering alternatives. And in 1977, before that, I was working with the legislators such as George Moscone, who was trying to put acupuncture into practice or develop legislation. And I was working with him and other legislators to develop the legislation on acupuncture, which is still now in effect. And this is 2017.
Can you say who George Moscone was?
He's a senator, a state senator, George Moscone. He's passed away, but he was very prominent in promoting Chinese medicine. At that time, actually, the legislators in Las Vegas had a program on acupuncture presented to the legislatures, and they were one of the first states to acknowledge the effectiveness of acupuncture and made it so that acupuncture could be practiced in the state, Las Vegas, Nevada. Yeah. California was third. Hawaii was there with Las Vegas, with Nevada, Honolulu, Hawaii, and then California was third. And again, we gave programs to the legislators about it. But at the same time in California, which few people know about, is that the acupuncturists were arrested in 1970s, being blamed for practicing medicine without a license. And something very amazing happened there, because there was an Italian lawyer, Mr. Barbagelata, something like that. We'll have to get that clear. He was very smart. His plea was that the acupuncturists never said they were practicing medicine. They were practicing acupuncture. So the case got thrown out of court because they weren't claiming to be practicing what they were indicted for. And so at the same time, Dana Ullman, who was one of the leaders in the homeopathy movement, in fact, he has several clinical books on on homeopathy. And he was arrested and again indicted for practicing medicine without a license. So using the same lawyer, his plea was never claimed to practice medicine, and we were practicing homeopathy. So that got thrown out of court. Then the third person, Christopher Hill, is a physician. Dr. Christopher Hill, a holistic practitioner, was including practices other than Western medicine and surgery, like nutrition and looking at the whole person. And etc. He was arrested. It was all in California. And he took the same plea that he wasn't claiming to practice medicine. He was practicing health practices, promoting that for his patients. So that got thrown out of court. So that was a great heyday in those times, for action. And so at the same time, as I was helping the acupuncturists and the others with documentations and meetings to try to get them out of jail, at the same time I was working up in Sacramento, traveling up to Sacramento to meet with George Moscone and Senator George Moscone and others in setting up the legislation for acupuncture. And that was a thrill, from jail, San Francisco jail, to the Senate offices in Sacramento. So anyway, that was a memorable time. At that time, in the 70s, we, East-West Academy of Healing Arts and I, were organizing conferences, huge conferences, on holistic health, because that was the term in those days, calling anything other than Western medicine. It's a practice of holistic health, Holistic. Of course, there were debates about whether it's WHOLISTIC, but we're talking about the integration of body, mind, and spirit, including the spiritual aspect. So we prefer to use the holistic, HOLO, holistic, HOLISTIC. But it doesn't matter. People were using both terms. And we had over 5,000 people at our conferences. It was a very exciting time. Lots of things were developing. And also, when I came down from Canada to the United States, Stanford had sponsored me to come down after my nursing education. And I was working at Stanford third floor clinical in research with the new procedures of Dr. Shumway's mitral valve operation and Dr. Kant, who was the kidney specialist and did kidney transplant. And then with cancer, the first research into DNA involvement with cancer, Dr. Farquhar. and then morbid obesity. People who was over 300 pounds into 400 pounds and using their own body to feed themselves and deal with their weight. There I introduced a food substance which I used for dessert, Chinese dessert. It's called agar agar, and that's the product that they use for petri dishes. But we use it to make a dessert in Chinese cooking. And I introduced that because they needed something that had no nutrition, and yet it can be varied in its presentation. So we could make it really stiff and hard, or like a junket or a drink, and introduce it to the research department at Stanford Clinical. And I just checked just a couple of years ago whether they still had that in the research protocol. And they said, yes, we're still, that's 2015, around then. And so they said, yes, we're still using it for certain protocols. So that was really wonderful. So we were on the cutting edge of Western medicine at that time. So moving to the cutting edge of alternative and complementary medicine is easy for me, although it was a shocker for the rest of the country, because I've been utilizing it and living Qigong in my everyday life and activities and etc. So from Stanford then, we moved onward to the fact that that there was great interest in all aspects of healing. So that's where my conferences of 5,000 people was partially funded by the government, and that was unheard of. So it was exciting that we did get the support of the government, though with many people with tongue-in-cheek and really was trying to cut it out. And I know that in one instance, we got just a little funding from the government for the program, which we had 5,000 people. 5,000 people. Because at that time, they supported education for the professionals. And one of the directors in the Department of Health and Human Services, the 5 top people of the different divisions like NIH, CDC, MODVOP, Education, Department of Education, and Mental Health, and another program, they met every month to decide on the function of the system. So the director of FDA said, "What is this?" And it said, "It's sort of like the Moonies," because at that time, the Moonies from Korea was being indicted for false information and ill practice and all that. And so anyway, we managed to hold it. And from that, we made some money to carry on future programs. And so, however, it was such an issue that I said, well, we'll return the $80,000 that you gave us. Of course, in our good management and organization, we made about $300 out of the $80 that they gave us. So these are highlights in which I think is fascinating what we go through indictment and through negative perspectives to reach to where we are now. So then the holistic health movement went on, continued. And in 1977, acupuncture was in California, was officially installed as part of the legislation. And as I said, I was very happy to be part of that. So in 1977, California became official for acupuncture.
Did you want to mention Miriam Lee at all, since
Sure.
she's so prominently
Yes. Amongst those who were jailed was our beloved Miriam Lee, who was on the advent of acupuncture being accepted into society. She was an excellent acupuncturist. She was also my teacher as well as others. Miriam Lee was taken in to research at University of California, San Francisco, yet she was not allowed to practice. That's the irony of it. She's good enough to go into a stalwart institution to do research, but the law says she can't practice. And so then she was jailed also for having been practicing acupuncture. So we all went to bat to help Miriam Lee get out of jail. And others were George Long, who also was jailed, and we helped him through the process. And I think he's in Asia somewhere now. So there are many others who have given time and money to help with the movement moving forward. So I think that in 1977s were the highlight of the evolution. Also at that time, I was running programs on other practices, such as the American Indian practices for healing. I remember when I went in for my examination for traditional Chinese medicine in 1977. I was one of the first 100 to be taken the examination. I was running a major national conference on Native American healing. And my comment to them when I had to leave the conference to take my exam and come back was that I hope that they will never allow their healing practice to be governed by Western medicine. And to date, 2017, they still have not. They still have obtained the freedom to practice because it is a spiritual practice to them. This is what they have attributed their practice as a spiritual practice. And unfortunately, Chinese medicine, we didn't move it to that, although it is a spiritual practice. It's very much body, mind, and spirit. So from there then, the vernacular for what is holistic health or alternative medicine, it became changing all the time. So in 1992, moving onward, is that Dr. David Eisenberg, who was the fair-haired child of research from Harvard, had carried out a research project on how many people and how much were they using complementary alternative medicine. And the results of his research said that around 50% of people were using complementary alternative medicine, and to the tune of $19 billion a year. So that meant that the money which the traditional medical system feel that should have been theirs, it was going out to alternative medicine. And that created a great furor because they thought, wow, this 19 billion, it should be part of in our pocket. They spent more on alternative medicine than they did on additional monies for surgery or medicine. And so then there was increased activity in the interest, and because this involves money now, which is they're losing from their what they felt was should be deservedly their coffer. So from that study, Congress developed a program called Office of Unconventional Medicine. And I was fortunate to be one of the 20 appointed to be part of that council developing that aspect. And right away, we were just aghast and said, we have to change it to something else. What? Unconventional medicine. But the only thing we could change it to was alternative medicine at that point. So we became the Office of Alternative Medicine, a project within the director of NIH's office. So it wasn't an institute yet, it was just a project, funded to the tune of about $2 million, which is like a drop in the bucket, being that the health system was funded to the terms of trillions of dollars, right? So 2 million, it was like nothing. So there's a big rise up about that too. And I said, you know, we're in the bowels of NIH, acknowledged in the bowels of research at NIH, which is a big plus in itself. And we have $2 million. At least we have some money. So let's make the most of this acknowledgement and move on from there. Because during the time, I think the women's special health emphasis had gotten about $10 or $12 million for their beginning. So everybody was comparing, oh, you only got 2 million. I said, never mind, this is a great beginning. So this evolved then later, that was 1990 something. So by the time 1998, we functioned as the project. In 1998, we became incorporated into the National Institutes of Health as the Center for Complementary Alternative Medicine, CAMP, and it became an institute. So no longer just a project in the office of the director. And I think we had the tune of about $22 million. I'd have to confirm that, up from 2 million. It still was not a huge amount of money. So anyway, it is now presently changed to calling the Integrative Medicine Department of NIH. So now the term is integrative medicine. And there's a constant battle to be holistic or to be more medical. And so that's an ongoing situation. And it is, however, functioning. And I was fortunate to have been on the council for the National Heart, Lung, Blood Institute for Alternative Medicine or Ethnic Medicine. And this is what I want to make a comment on, is that we survived because we took the platform that we have to be culturally sensitive, and that we were culturally sensitive to Chinese medicine for the Chinese population, the American Indian for the healing art for the Indians, and the medicine that the South American or the Spanish people also did, and for Indian Ayurveda medicine. So we casted a multicultural emphasis, and I think that saved us from being annihilated. Not just a modern concept of Western medicine that is evolving. And so it was a cultural diversity and emphasis on that good health care has to answer to the cultural diversity. So they could not ban us, they could not eliminate that concept. So we thought that was a very excellent focus, because that is exactly what we were doing. We're just using it more strongly as an argument for the need for this holistic health, and approach. So anyway, now in 2000, because of the demands by the public for complementary alternative medicine, the then President Bill Clinton developed the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy. That's really important, that word policy at the end. It isn't just looking at what is being done, but how is complementary alternative medicine going to fit into the system, and how can we promote it in a proper way that complementary alternative medicine will be properly introduced, and avoid the dangers that can come with any practice. Even Western medicine, they have its danger, and then holistic health and complementary alternative medicine also has its danger if it's overly zealous and they don't worry about research into the validity. Although our argument about research is that for the first time, research is to be done on live people and animals, and not by tissue, and on energy, which is a live entity, not a dead entity. So that our debate has always been that we need to secure new protocols of research, and that we needed new instrumentation to measure what we don't know. So those are two issues that I and several others have constantly put forth in promoting thought about research protocols and proper instrumentation, so that the research that we have and the outcomes of the research perhaps may not speak to the ultimate possibilities of these other practices. So the biomedical science is very restricted to a linear type of investigation. So anyway, that is very interesting, that evolving from multicultural and the energy concept, which is prevalent right now, although not everybody understands what the energy means, So from the White House Commission on Complementary Alternative Medicine, it spanned Clinton's presidency to young Bush's administration, 2000 to 2004. And through that activity, I have to give credit to President Clinton's braveness in introducing this, because it was not accepted, by the mass, and particularly by the threatened medical professions. And so that from that commission, that internationally there was a greater awareness of integrative medicine or complementary alternative medicine, and that other countries were also looking at incorporating CAM into their system. And I have to say that through the years, the other countries like India, even Africa and China, has been more successful in integrating their ethnic practices into the mainstream and practice as their native practice, not twisted and try to make it a medical model. But many other countries have done this successfully, like Germany and France and Europe, etc. So, but unfortunately, in the USA, the practitioners and leaders of the complementary alternative medicine and the ethnic practices have been trying to mold the ethnic practices and complementary alternative medicine into a medical model, and that is a real mistake. It should develop its own system to practice the way it is originally practiced, the original form and format. Because in trying to make it Western medicine, it has lost some of its potent outcomes that, speaking about Chinese medicine, that Chinese medicine and Qigong can achieve. And this is where
What would be the differences? How would you describe the differences?
the differences, when you take a medical model, we know that the medical model is failing. It's not just by my word, but CNN, World News, and other films that has been produced, such as Escape Fire is one of them, but there are many other films like that, shows the iniquity of Western medicine, and that Western medicine has become a illness monitoring system, not a healthcare system. And it has dropped from the rank of the first 3 down to 50 in the worldwide assessment of effectiveness. And we're the most expensive healthcare system or disease monitoring system in the whole wide world, but we are failing in our outcomes. So there are data which we can get more of that, to include in here. And but from the White House Commission policy on complementary alternative medicine policy, the outcome was that almost every country, and in the United States, almost every medical school now has a department of integrative medicine or energy medicine or alternative medicine, whatever the verbiage will be. And that has really culminated from the White House Commission that this has happened. Some is just a program, others are actually division that have millions of dollars to implement the practices of and research. The big emphasis is to do research and to get the essential database so that it validates the practice of complementary alternative medicine. I have to bring it up to date really right now that in recent days even, and they've been promoting it for a long time, is the Samueli Foundation. Samueli, Samueli Foundation. They have been supporting, as I said, smaller projects on alternative complementary medicine. But just recently, 2-3 weeks ago or so, they have dedicated $200 million from their foundation to fund UC Irvine to develop a complementary alternative medicine practice institute and energy medicine, whatever you want to call it. And that is a big, big, big happy information, happy news. So they've already said that many doctors are very unhappy with that and have concerns. And of course, that's natural because they are now supporting something outside of their practice and they're fearing that it will interfere or take away business from Western medicine. So it comes down to, unfortunately, the financial aspect of what healthcare is. And but I think more and more philanthropists are, because of the Samueli, not only, but the large part, the Samuelis, willing to take a chance and, quote, sticking their neck out, that more philanthropists will be willing to finance research and programs for complementary alternative medicine, or what they're calling integrative medicine right now.
Well, what do you say to the claim that medical research showed that acupuncture was just a placebo, that it's not really effective?
Well, for years, I have discussed the value of placebos, because with many placebos, it seems to work where all else have failed. And they discard it as, oh, that's just bunk. Why? It works, so why not do research on it to see why it works? Because we have discovered that the human mind, the psyche, and the spiritual aspect is much more powerful than the physical body. And it is the off balance of the psyche and the emotion and the spiritual aspect of the human, the whole human being, that is creating the physical manifestation. And this is what placebo has in all its time. They give them sugar pills, or, empty, just plain water, and it works because the mind, has the most greatest power to manifest whatever it is that we have. And what we've done is Wayne Jonas has finally, in the past few years, set up research on placebo and has gotten some very interesting results. And we need to get what those results and studies have been, to validate what I just said. But Dr. Wayne Jonas was on the committees that I was on in the Department of Health and Human Services and National Council, and with research, NIH, and also on President Clinton's White House Commission on complementary alternative medicine policy. So he is still very much active right now. And there's others now that have been doing research on placebo and have found very valuable outcome. So what we've discarded, just because it doesn't jibe with the Western biomedical model, we should look into instead of just discarding it, because it doesn't hold line with a very stringent and very narrow focus of what research should be, or what Western medicine or what healthcare could be. In other words, we're not talking about healthcare, we're talking about life care now, because it isn't just your health, it's your health affecting your life and how you live your life. And that is really important right now. So that if you're unhappy with your situations, then you're going to develop physical manifestations, right? If your job isn't doing well, and your relationship isn't doing well, and you're having a problem with other things, or the environment, and the food is getting to be less nutritious, and all of this, it affects. And also you don't have a spiritual aspect. You just get up, eat, and sleep, and go back to work with no mission or passion in life. Then you're going to develop some problems, physical problems. Okay, so anyway, the placebo is a very important thing to pursue, and I'm very happy to say that we have, begun the thought on that manner, that more people are doing research on placebo and have found it to be useful. And we should do that with everything else that we don't understand. For example, my work with my system, Chao Integrated Healing System / Chao Medical Qigong, have gotten results time and time again with people who have paralysis, people who have been in coma and destined to die imminently, and cerebral palsy, ADD, ADHD, diabetes, cancer, last stage, stage 4 cancer, healed when all else had failed. Literally, the doctor says, you're healed of the cancer patients that I have worked with. I don't call them patients, I call them clients, because they have a right to know everything that's being done, and they have a choice of whether to live or to die. Elaborating on the, quote, prejudices that we ran into in moving our cultural heritage and ethnic practices into mainstream. Of course, there was a lot of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge about what the cultural practices are. So in growing up with that, I experienced a lot of dubiousness and also looking at what we practice, which I had mentioned, it was successful in dealing with conditions that were challenging to the Western medical system, and that they had given up hope, and that they said the prognosis is imminent death. And we used, quote, our medicine, Chinese medicine. And I'm sure the other cultures experienced similarly in my dialogue with the people with Ayurveda medicine and American Indian healers and the African hoodoo healers and the Hispanic also, the healers of the Hispanic race. So they would not only look at our practice with dubiousness and unknowingness, but they actually created an anxiety by refusing to acknowledge that it had any benefit, even though the benefit was acknowledged and the patient lived, whereas they were going to die. And as I said, this Mr. Wong lived for another 15 years after we used Chinese medicine and Qigong and herbs and so forth on him. So that was back in 1960s, 1950s, 1940s, and going back to when I was young. However, there is still that stigma attached to the attitude about complementary alternative medicine and ethnic medicine by a large percentage of the population who has never been exposed to the cultural diversity. And it is amazing that with the advent of electronics and advent of TV and radio and exposure to cultural aspects of life and to the world, that this still exists. And I think the fact that complementary alternative medicine and ethnic practices are not reimbursed for use, and people have to put out of their own pocket for utilizing methods which are in fact effective, and yet insurance will only cover medicine and surgery, and which in the case of cancer is very little help with Western medicine. In fact, the expectant rate of effectiveness is only about 4% in the long run. Initially, it might have this spurt of hope, but then it doesn't last. And yet, with the proof that acupuncture in the hospitals and in clinics and in their own schools have proven to be about 70% effective. And with Qigong and with what we've been doing, we've been actually 95% success rate with hard to cure cases or unable to cure cases as determined by Western medicine and or activities of daily living that we have gotten results where all else have failed. So we need a high educational program for the masses to orient them to the fact that there are other methods and systems that are effective, whereas our modern Western medicine has failed.